In this video, I'll be showing you how to make a paint application with clickable buttons. If you have not yet watched the video about clickable buttons, go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to go ahead and put in a NoStroke command inside of function setup just so it applies to everything else that happens in function draw. I'm going to make 3 variables, one for R, one for G, and one for B, setting them all equal to 0. This is going to be how we control the color that appears on our canvas when we click the button. That'll make more sense later on. So we're going to head over to function draw, and I'm going to start putting in a conditional statement. If mouse is pressed with a curly bracket at the end, make sure you capitalize the I and the P and you're not putting any spaces. Then what we want to happen is we want to fill in with R, G, and B, those 3 variables that we just made that are changeable. And we want to have an ellipse. We want that to be located at our mouse X, mouse Y, and I'm going to set it to be 50 by 50. And mouse X, mouse Y, mouse is pressed, those are all just built-in variables that the computer will already recognize. Just a few commands that it's really familiar with. I like to press that little button on the left-hand side just to make sure that all my curly brackets line up. It'll also tell me on the screen, it'll come up with an error message if I have curly brackets that don't have an opening and a closing, but it's just good practice to double check everything. Next, I'm going to go outside of those curly brackets, but still inside of the curly brackets of function draw, and I'm going to make a red rectangle at 50-50, and I'll make it 50 by 50. You can make these any size or color you want. I'm going to do another one right next to it that is at 100, 50, and that one's going to be blue. This is just 2 examples. You can use other colors if you want to. It's completely up to you. So the next thing that I'm going to do is actually make it so that when I click with my mouse inside of those colors, my ellipse changes to those colors. So I'm going to start by saying if mouse X, and I'm noticing that that error message is coming up. So I'm going to put some comment lines in front, just 2 slashes. This makes it so that the computer doesn't read what I'm working on because it can get confused when you're in the middle of a conditional statement. And that makes it so we can't see on our canvas, which is really somewhere that we need to be looking. So I'm going to say if mouse X is greater than 50, which is the left line of the red, we're going to start with the red square, and mouse X is less than 100, which is the right side, and make sure that you're always matching up that opening curly bracket with a closing curly bracket. Next, I'm going to go to my Y commands, make sure that my mouse Y is greater than 50 and less than 100. Then I'm going to put in a line that checks if my mouse is pressed. So if my mouse is inside of that X, inside of that Y, and I click my mouse, then I want that ellipse to turn red, and I'm going to show you how to do that next. So we're going to add in 3 lines inside of these 3 conditional statements that are all kind of sandwiched together. We're going to make it so that R equals whatever the fill is that we put in above our red rectangle. So R in that case was 255, G is 0, and B is 0 as well. So now what I can do is I can uncomment all that code, and once I get all of those slashes out of there, I'm going to be able to test this and make sure that it works. I'm also going to use the pretty button in this case because you can see that the mouse X, mouse Y, all of those conditional statements kind of got a little disorganized looking. So if you just make sure that every single line of your code, except for the ones that end with a curly bracket, have a semicolon at the end, you can press that pretty button and it'll just help you get a little bit more organized and help space everything out so it's easier to look at. You get those gray lines that line up between the if and the closing curly bracket that matches up with that line. And so now I can test it. I think that my ellipse is a little bit too big, so I'm going to change it down to a smaller size, and I can draw using my red. But now if I click on the blue square, it's not doing what I want it to do because we haven't written code for that yet. At this time, you could copy and paste the code that we already did, lines 11 through 19, but I'm going to just write it again for the sake of practicing. But if you're going to make a whole rainbow of colors, definitely copy and paste. It's going to save you a lot of time and a lot of trouble, especially if you have them all in one line, because you'll notice that our Y is going to be the same every time. So you'll just have to change the mouse X. So I'm going to do the mouse X and the mouse Y for my blue square, making sure that I put the two and signs, making sure that I'm ending with a curly bracket, and then adding in that third line to check if my mouse is pressed. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to double check what my color code was. So it looks like R is 0, G is 0, and B is 255. This is pretty easy while I'm using just the plain red and blue colors, but if you choose to do like a lilac-y purple color, it'll have all three different numbers that you need to enter in. So I will uncomment all of that code, making sure that I have 3 closing curly brackets. I'll make sure that I have all of my semicolons in place, and I'll press the pretty button. Again, do not press the pretty button unless you have all your semicolons ready to go. So like I said before, I like to use those little triangles at the side just to double check that everything is matching up. An error code will come up if you don't have your opening and closing curly brackets matching up, but that is probably the biggest issue that I see that people have. So now you can see that my red and my blue square are working. Now would be a great time to add in a bunch more colors, but I'm going to leave that as a challenge for you. So try to add in 5, 6, maybe a whole rainbow of colors that you can choose from.